in the audience like to go to an amusement park?
Nope.
Most of you, right? I want to share with you, put your hands down, my favorite kind of ride. And if you agree with me, you could do something like this. Give me a thumbs up. My favorite ride when I go to an amusement park is a roller coaster. Anyone agree to that?
Yes, Eric.
Well, like every amusement park, okay, you can put your thumbs down or up, or whichever way. Like every amusement park, there's rides that I try to go on first because they're my favorite. And then there are some rides that are my least favorite. My least favorite ride, just so you should know, in case we ever go to an amusement park together, is what's called a people mover. People mover. A people mover basically is, unlike a roller coaster that is so exciting, it goes up and down and fast, and I heard someone say sometimes there's loops. When it comes to a people mover, basically the whole purpose of it, it takes you from one part of the park to the other, and you sit there, and it goes very, very slowly. Not the most exciting thing in the world. You're probably wondering, why am I talking to you about roller coasters and people movers? So when I think about last week's Parshat, which was Parshat Yitro, which we learned about this very amazing, exciting time in which the Jewish people received the Torah. There was lightning and thunder. Moshe came down with the Aseret Divrot, which has in it some of the most powerful mitzvot about serving Hashem properly, not worshiping idols, Zakartem Shabbat, remember the Shabbat, Kaved et Avicha, V'atimecha, honoring your parents. I think of a roller coaster, which gets me excited with great enthusiasm. And then we get to this week's Parshat, Parshat Mishpatim. Parshat Mishpatim has laws which maybe are not so exciting, at least at first glance. I'll give you a few examples. There's so many mitzvot in this week's Parshat. If a person has an ox, which I hope you guys don't, but imagine that you did back in those days. That ox, if it would take its horns and gore someone, hurt someone, the Torah says you must pay for those damages. You have to pay. After all, this person was hurt, you have to go to the doctor, so you have to pay for that person to get better. Okay. What else does it say? If a person takes a shovel and you start digging this huge hole, and someone is just walking and admiring the beautiful nature around it, and whoop, falls inside of that pit, same thing. You have to pay for that person who got hurt. You have to pay for those damages. All right. Another one, you guys don't seem so excited. I'll tell you two more. There's many. So another one has to do with what's called the Arba Shomrim. If, let's say, you borrow something, so what ends up happening? Let's say you weren't paying much attention, and then the thing got lost. So you have to pay the guy back. Okay? I'm sure you really can't wait to hear the fourth one I'm going to share with you. If a person has a fire, and it's right next to a field, and maybe they weren't so careful, all of a sudden that fire goes and burns part of that person's field, and it ruins their crops. You have to pay for those crops. So I think you're probably getting where I'm going with this. This is kind of like if we would go to an amusement park, I look at it as a people mover. The question is, what is this connection? It seems to be from one of the most exciting stories of Parshiot to this one. So, I'd like to tell you that the answer, believe it or not, is not in the first word in this week's Parshat, Mishpatim. It's actually the first letter. First letter. The Parshat begins, V'eila HaMishpatim. Now, all your teachers will be probably upset about what I'm about to say, because we know that when we write a paragraph, one thing you should never ever do, and correct me if I'm wrong, teachers, you never start a paragraph with the word and.
Yeah, that's true.
To start a paragraph with the word and seems to be a little bit incorrect. But yet, if we think about the name of the Parsha, it's Ve'ela HaMishpatim, and these are the laws, which is amazing. We actually will start an entire Parsha with the word and, or the letter Vav, which means and on this, it's explained. There's a reason for that Vav. It's called the Vav HaChibur. It's to make a connection. I'm going to call you guys in a second, okay? To make a connection, what we're learning now in Mishpatim, to what took place in last week's Parshat, Parshat Yitro. Now, just like the Aseret Debrot, which are so important and special, they were given at Har Sinai, so too all the things that I mentioned to you now, those 4 things that I mentioned, also were given to the Jewish people at Har Sinai, which teaches us a very important lesson. And that lesson is, a lot of times people will look at Parshat Yitro, the 10 Commandments, and say, this is what's most important. A person needs to serve Hashem, like we do. We daven to Hashem. We daven Shachrit every morning, and that's very important. The question is, what do we do when we are done with Tefillah? How do we interact? How do we talk with each other? Parshat Mishpatim is telling us that it's just as important the way that we deal with each other, just as much as what was found on those 10 Commandments. So let's look one more time at the 4 things I mentioned. We have an ox. Now, most of us, as I said, probably don't have an ox. But with a show of hands, does anyone here have in their house a pet? Some of you have a pet. Some of you put your hands down. I'm sure you guys have a lot of amazing exotic animals in your house. But I'll share with you, imagine, for example, a person may have a new dog, what is not well trained. And the Torah is telling us, it's not necessarily talking about an ox. It's talking about anyone who has, let's say, an animal or a pet in their house. How do we treat that animal? And also, what do we do? Do we just allow your, let's say, dog who's not trained to run around and possibly hurt someone? So this, the Torah says, we have to think about all the people around us and not do that. We may not, I don't see anyone with a shovel here, and a person falling into a pit, but I have seen you guys with water bottles, and sometimes those water bottles spill on the ground. And you can say to yourself, what's the difference? I'm not gonna drink that, right? It's on the ground. So I'm just gonna leave it there. The problem is, if you leave that water there, someone could walk by, someone could slip. And the Torah is telling us, not necessarily just about a big, huge hole that someone digs, but also the things that we have to be careful so it's not going to hurt anyone. I mentioned to you also about if you borrow something. Well, how many of you, I know all you parents make sure that we have plenty of supplies, how many in the past week borrowed a pencil, for example? From a friend or anyone? A lot of you, right? Yeah. So, a lot of times, and it's not because we really did anything wrong, we just don't think about it. Sometimes we borrow a pencil, and sometimes we forget to give it back. We have to remember that when we borrow something, it's not mine, and someone's doing me a favor, I need to make sure to give back what I borrowed. And the last one I talked to you about, the person makes a fire. Now, of course, all of us are very careful not to make a fire. Safety is number one. But, just like a fire, if you're not watching it, it can cause damage. So too, if, let's say, for example, not that this happens here, imagine if someone decides not to pay attention to class. Imagine. I know, it's hard to imagine. But if that would ever happen, so you yourself, you're not learning, but you're not affecting the people around you. When you decide to talk and disturb, what you're doing is just like that fire, you're causing other people not to learn. But instead, we do the opposite. We may have a fire, but that fire is a good thing within us, which is called enthusiasm, excitement, a spark. And that spark also can spread, but that can spread in a good way. When we are good to each other, when we speak nicely to one another, that positive way of speaking spreads to everyone. And that, in fact, is a very, very important message. So even though it may be that this week's Parsha may not be as exciting, I would not call it like a people mover. Shabbat Shalom!